The controversy at Glastonbury, specifically Bob Vyland's chant of death, death to the IDF, the BBC's broadcast decisions, the Director General's response, the broader question of what constitutes hate speech under UK law is crucial, particularly if we are defending the incarceration of someone like Lucy Connolly for calling for violence against migrants. We cannot turn a blind eye when thousands chant for the death of Israeli soldiers. And it's got very little to do with whether we're supporting Palestine or Israel. It's about the concept of that death chant, I think. And it's an interesting point when it's broadcast on national television. Bob Vylan, a rap pump duo, performed on the Westholt stage and led the crowd chanting "Death, death to the IDF," specifically referring to Israel's defence forces. The crowd joined in, it was filmed. The BBC broadcast it live with only a brief content warning. Kneecap, the Belfast hip hop group, performed later with anti Starmer chants and calls to start a riot outside a court. Now, Avon and Somerset Police are now conducting criminal investigation into both acts under public order and hate crime legislation. And the Director General, Tim Davie, who was at Glastonbury, was informed of the chance, but the BBC didn't pull the live stream for 5 hours. After criticism, the BBC apologised. Ofcom, the UK's broadcast regulator, said it was very concerned and asked how the BBC allowed it to air. And this raises, I think, vital questions about editorial responsibility. The BBC is not a neutral bystander here. It amplified those words to millions. Under UK law, hate speech generally refers to threatening, abusive, or insulting words intended to stir up hatred based on race, religion, or nationality. But there's also incitement to violence more broadly. And when Lucy Connolly posted that hotels housing asylum seekers should be burned, she was jailed for inciting violence, a direct criminal offence. When Bob Vylan called for death to the IDF, he was calling for violence against a group defined by nationality and military function. Is there a legal difference? Possibly. Soldiers are not a protected characteristic in hate crime law, but incitement to violence remains a criminal matter. It does not become art simply because there's a beat behind it. Why was Lucy Connolly prosecuted, but musicians and thousands of revellers might not be? The law is supposed to be consistent. I think this law in particular is deeply wrong. It's based on interpretation, and a subjective interpretation at that. There isn't an objective definition of what hate speech actually is and what incitement actually is. If Connolly's words were rightly judged as incitement, how can death to the IDF be waved away as a mere protest or an art form? And there's a question of complicity. If it was not just the artist but a crowd of thousands chanting along, broadcast by the BBC, who should actually be dragged into court? The musicians, the public at Glastonbury, the BBC, the people who turned on their TV sets. If the law applies to incendiary WhatsApp posts, then it should also apply to festival chants. And if Lucy Connolly, who took down her post within minutes, I believe, of posting it, can be held responsible for that, and the BBC left their post up for 5 hours before taking it down, there are parallels here that need to be explored. Some argue that death to the IDF is simply condemnation of a military force, not incitement to kill individual soldiers. Artists claim that they are highlighting war crimes in Gaza, bringing attention to civilian deaths. Critics say this is a fig leaf. You cannot dehumanize anyone, soldiers or not, with chants demanding their death, and pretend that it's high moral ground. Death to the IDF is not the same as we support Palestine. Artistic expression is not a free pass for calling for violence. And the test must remain. And the same thing with kneecap. Calling for a riot is calling for a riot. It's calling for violence. Do words encourage violence, stir hatred, or threaten public order? And then there's another issue. When crowds chant and they join in a chant, it's no longer an individual opinion. It becomes collective incitement. Crowd psychology matters. And history shows us how chants and slogans can turn to violence, even if not immediately. A BBC stage is not a private venue. It's a national platform. If we jail Lucy Connolly for urging arson against asylum seekers, consistency demands serious scrutiny of calls for death to Israeli soldiers from a festival stage. This is not about jumping on a right-wing bandwagon. Art has power, and that's precisely why it must be held to account. In the same way, I think the debate about rap lyrics and about drill and so on is valuable, except that, as you will know if you followed my channel long enough, I defend people. I defend rap lyrics deeply, in the same way as I defend Shakespeare. What I'm looking at here is consistency. And the BBC Director General's apology, of course, is welcome but insufficient. It must enforce its own rules robustly and reflect its own moral responsibilities. As a society, we have to defend free speech, but not the freedom to incite violence. If we're going to imprison one person, we must imprison the others. We cannot have one rule for Facebook posts and another for festival stages. Bob Vyland chanted "Death, death to the IDF" at Glastenbury, broadcast live on BBC. Avon and Somerset police have launched a criminal investigation, and the BBC Director General knew of the chant during the festival and didn't immediately pull the stream. Hate speech under UK law includes incitement to violence. If this was not incitement to violence, it's a very strange interpretation of the words. Lucy Connolly was jailed for urging arson against migrants. So the question has to be, is there a double standard? Why is anyone even dithering over this one? I think there is a double standard. And I think I think the first thing we have to do is not for the Avon and Somerset police to start a criminal investigation into a rap singer's words, but to look again at Lucy Connolly's conviction and her continued incarceration and ask whether or not this is just and consistent and appropriate.